the first time I've been able to chat with y'all since the Super Bowls. We'll do a little bit of a Super Bowl recap, what it means to have so many LSU Tigers in the Super Bowl and the lasting impact it could make on the LSU football program, its legacy, and its reputation. Plus, it is Mailbag Wednesday, so we'll get into some of your questions. All of that and more on the Locked On LSU podcast.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making the Locked On LSU podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I am your host, Caroline Fenton, as I am every day. So make sure you follow along on Twitter. You can follow my personal Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. You can also follow the podcast Twitter at Locked On LSU. I'll be posting podcast updates on each of those Twitter accounts daily. Also, it is Mailbag Wednesday, so feel free to send in any questions that you may have for next Mailbag Wednesday. You can tweet them at me directly. You can DM me on either of those accounts. You can comment them on any of the YouTube pages. Make sure to subscribe to the Locked On LSU YouTube page. We'll have all of our podcasts going up on the YouTube page as well. So make sure to interact. I'm always here for any questions, comments you may have, any feedback about the podcast. I want to hear from y'all because this is your podcast. But first and foremost, this is the first time I've been able to chat with you since the Super Bowl, and there have been so many LSU storylines surrounding the Super Bowl. I recapped a few of them last week. Not only was it kind of the LSU brotherhood that was able to blur the lines between the two teams playing in the Super Bowl. We saw that Joe Burrow spent a good amount of time with Andrew Whitworth when he was rehabbing over the summer. We saw Joe Burrow having the highest jersey sales in 2 states. We saw Joe Burrow being what potentially being at the time. We ultimately didn't end up that way, but Joe Burrow could have been the very first quarterback to win a national championship, a Heisman, and a Super Bowl. That was in the cards. I mean, some serious record-breaking stuff for a lot of LSU football players on the biggest stage in football. So I definitely want to recap all of that. But I want to thank you for making the Locked On LSU podcast your first listen every day. So, as we now know, Los Angeles Rams now Super Bowl champions in their own stadium. Good for them. It was a hard-fought game on both sides. I genuinely thought it was a pretty decent game all the way up until the final couple of minutes whenever the refs finally decided to throw a few flags. I thought that was very interesting. But Joe Burrow ultimately doesn't get his moment in the sun. But not yet. And what I have to say to a lot of LSU fans that might be upset, say, that was Joe Burrow's opportunity, quote unquote, he could have blown it on the biggest stage in football. And I don't think that you can knock Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase or any LSU player that was in the Super Bowl for quote unquote blowing it in the Super Bowl. But I think one important thing to keep in mind is that be happy that it happened, be happy that our LSU guys were on the biggest stage in football, but also understand that it will likely happen again. Now, I know that there were several LSU Tigers in the Super Bowl, and I want to get to a few more of them coming up later in the podcast, but I want to focus on Joe Burrow now, because that was the name that we heard more than any of them. It's a starting quarterback for a team competing in the Super Bowl, a starting quarterback that I feel pretty confident in saying single-handedly got them there. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the Bengals have been consistently one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the league. Joe Burrow comes in, and in his second year, his first year fully healthy, he completely turns his team around and gets them to the Super Bowl. I don't think that's a coincidence. So I feel confident in saying that it was Joe Burrow. He was the one who was able to get the Bengals to the Super Bowl. So while it's unfortunate, while LSU fans might be bummed, LSU fans who invested in a Joe Burrow Bengals jersey and really wanted to see them hoist the Lombardi at the end of the game, don't be discouraged. And I guess that's a message that I can inadvertently tell Bengals fans who may or may not be LSU fans as well. Bengal players, don't be upset that it's over. And don't be upset that it didn't ultimately end in a championship this time around. Because I said going into this Super Bowl, this is really the Rams' opportunity to win the Super Bowl. In my opinion, I thought the Bengals were kind of playing with house money. I mean, nobody expected them to get there, kind of overcoming all of the odds against the Cincinnati Bengals. But with the Rams, I mean, you could see how much draft capital, how much money they invested in this team. And their window was incredibly small. I mean, you look at them picking up Odell Beckham Jr., who I want to get into later on in the podcast. You look at Van Jefferson, you look at Von Miller, you look at a lot of guys that the Rams were willing to invest in that really don't have the longest career ahead of them. They have a few years under their belt. They're getting older. They may be suffering from injury. The Rams had a win right now mentality. They also had several guys on one-year deals or expiring deals that they may not be able to renew due to cap space. So I thought, in my opinion, okay, the Rams are in win-now mentality. The Bengals, on the other hand, they're young. They have about $50 million in cap space, and they're really building something special. So they were kind of playing with house money there. So I feel confident in saying that this is not the last that we are going to see from Joe Burrow in a Super Bowl. And I understand that is incredibly easy to say and so much harder to do. I understand that getting to the Super Bowl is really freaking hard. And I think that we all got a little spoiled with Tom Brady, seeing him do it, 10 times in his career. But I mean, you look at some of the best quarterbacks of all time. They didn't get to multiple Super Bowls. Dan Marino never even won one. Aaron Rodgers won one. Russell Wilson won one. So getting to the Super Bowl is really hard, and winning it is even harder. And I understand that the Bengals have the issues of their own. I mean, they have an owner who's not necessarily willing to throw money at the team. They still don't have an indoor practice facility. I don't know how willing they are to invest in additional pieces to add on to this team. I understand that the Bengals have a subpar offensive line that needs some serious boosting up in the offseason if they don't want to get Joe Burrow killed. Because I don't know if y'all saw that hit late in the Super Bowl, and you saw that slow motion replay where you just see the just bone-chilling grimace on Joe Burrow's face, and he's grabbing his knee. And the first thing I thought was, oh my God, they did it again. They did it again. They got him killed again. So the offensive line needs help. The Bengals don't have a great history. They're not a blue blood NFL team. So I understand that the odds aren't great. But with a quarterback like Joe Burrow, a leader like Joe Burrow, we saw it at LSU. We saw it with the Cincinnati Bengals this year. He's the kind of quarterback that can hoist your program and get you back onto the national stage, get you back onto the biggest stage in football. And I think that this is the beginning of a very long career for Joe Burrow. I mean, like, you look at a lot of the conversation post-Super Bowl. It's been nothing but praise for Joe Burrow. It's been nothing but support for Joe Burrow. It's been nothing but people saying, wow, that's a bummer for Cincinnati and their fans who haven't experienced any playoff success in the entire existence of the team. And here they are in the Super Bowl. It's a bummer for those teams, and it's kind of a tough story. But all the conversation has been supportive of Joe Burrow. And the conversation surrounding Matthew Stafford has been kind of negative. All the conversation has been, well, does Matthew Stafford even belong in the Hall of Fame? Side note, I don't think that he does quite yet. I need to see more from Matthew Stafford, but I digress. That I think that everyone is on board for Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals to only prepare for more success in the future. So while it's unfortunate that they weren't able to get the win, that they came all that way, that they beat the odds and they were able to get through one of the toughest roads in sports in getting to the Super Bowl, bypassing the Tennessee Titans who sacked them 9 times, bypassing a team that won the Super Bowl 2 years ago and went last year in the Kansas City Chiefs. They beat a lot of odds and the road was difficult and they overcame it. But I don't think that that's going to be the end that we see of Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and the Cincinnati Bengals in the Super Bowl. Just got to get them some help. Get them some O-line help, and God forbid, get Eli Apple off the field. Please boost their backfield just a little bit. My goodness. But coming up next, we will focus on 2 other players that once wore the purple and gold and were out on the Super Bowl field on Sunday. Could LSU be a contender for the title of wide receiver U. We'll get into that coming up next, but before we do that, I want to let y'all know about Built Bar. So we're a few weeks into the new year, and it's about around this time of year that I've kind of given up on my New Year's resolutions. Going to the gym every day doesn't seem as fun, and eating healthy doesn't seem as appetizing, but not with Built Bar, because I'm sticking to my resolution to eat healthy and to eat right, to give my body the fuel that it needs thanks to Built Bar. And it almost feels like I'm not really sticking to my resolution at all because I actually enjoy eating Built Bars. Plus, they have a new product out, and they're called Puffs. If you haven't tried them, you are missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. I definitely recommend it. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. It tastes like a treat. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar. They are a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. So it kind of tastes like you're eating a candy bar. They have fan favorite flavors. They've got yummy cinnamony churro, which sounds delicious. I haven't tried that one yet, but I'll definitely put that one next on my list. They've got coconut marshmallow, my favorite, banana cream pie. They are so good, and banana cream pie is my favorite. I think it's going to be your new favorite too. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs included 100% real chocolate, and they're low calorie. They're high protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They're better. A typical candy bar has around 200 to 300 calories, but not Built Bar, because it's a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And if you go to built.com and scroll down to the macros chart, you'll be totally blown away. They have high protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Candy bars have a ton of calories, a ton of sugar, and a ton of carbs. All the things you don't need in your body. Built Bar gives you all the good stuff, and you don't have to compromise the taste. So try out mint brownie, coconut almond, and this month's new flavor, white chocolate cookies and cream. They are delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If they think a flavor might be good, they'll make it, and it'll be delicious, and it will be good for you. So try out Built Bar. They're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, and then they get all the healthy stuff in there. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Caroline Fenton. Now, we recapped Joe Burrow, probably the biggest NFLSU member that was in the Super Bowl on Sunday, but we also have two of our favorite pass-catching favorites who made an appearance in the Super Bowl on Sunday. We look at Jamar Chase and Odell Beckham Jr., both had their tenures at different times at LSU. Both found a ton of success. Jamar Chase ultimately winning a national championship. Odell Beckham Jr. having a few years in the NFL under his belt. So while they had similar roads, similar backgrounds, their journeys were a little bit different. And we always like to tout LSU as being DBU, Defensive Back University. And I think that they very much so earned that title. But of course, I'm a bit biased. But I think that you could make an argument that after this past weekend, after this Super Bowl Sunday featuring two wide receivers from LSU on both sides, you could also make the argument that LSU is also wide receiver U. And I know you're going to say, okay, well, what about Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Notre Dame, Oklahoma? 100%. Those are all contenders as well. There are plenty of those alum that are making huge splashes in the NFL. But I was looking at some of the betting trends from the Super Bowl. Two of the top bets, so the most placed bets, not necessarily by monetary value, but two bets that were placed more than any other bet, two of the top 10. One, Jamar Chase, first touchdown scorer. Two, Odell Beckham Jr., first touchdown scorer. There were several bets placed across different sports books. Jamar Chase over receiving yards. Odell Beckham Jr., 2+ touchdowns. Now, well, that one didn't hit. I mean, there are people that are willing to put their hard-earned money on the guys that came out of LSU on the biggest stage in the NFL. And it's not just one player. It's not just one wide receiver. It's two wide receivers on opposing teams, both that have become some of the biggest names in the NFL. So I look at that and I have to think, is LSU the new it place to go if you're a wide receiver? I mean, LSU has proved that they can produce quarterbacks. I mean, their quarterback just won the Heisman a couple years ago. So if you're a wide receiver and you see all of the alum, and it's not just Jamar Chase and Odell Beckham Jr., of course, two of the best wide receivers to come out of LSU showing themselves on the largest stage in football definitely doesn't hurt. But you also look at Jarvis Landry, you look at Justin Jefferson. I mean, those four guys plus some, I mean, they are making huge splashes in the NFL. So if I'm a recruit, whether I'm from the state of Louisiana or not, you have to look at that. And if that's your ultimate goal is to get to the NFL, which I have to assume is every single college football player's ultimate goal or ultimate dream is to make it in the NFL, and not just make it, but to make it to the Super Bowl, to be a rookie of the year, to be one of the highest selling jerseys from your team, to have your name on SportsCenter, of course that's what you want. And that's what you see from several LSU players, and especially kind of on a marquee moment at the Super Bowl. So I see you, Clemson, and I see you, Ohio State, and I see you, Alabama and Georgia and Notre Dame and Oklahoma. But I think that LSU very much so is writing their own story in the book of this wide receiver U. And I think that if I'm a recruit, I've got to be looking at that and say, that's what I want to do. I want to catch passes in the Super Bowl. Two LSU players did it. Why can't you? Coming up next, we have got a little bit of a mailbag Wednesday. We do it every Wednesday. I'm going to get to as many questions as I possibly can. If I didn't get to your question this week, I apologize. I'll try my best to get to it next week. So we'll get to your questions coming up next on Mailbag Wednesday. But before we do that, gotta tell y'all about BetOnline.net. So unfortunately, football is over for this season, and it kind of tastes like vinegar coming out of my mouth because I just don't want to admit it. But just because football is over does not mean that you can't get in on any sort of betting action. Basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. So from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is your number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Consider it your one-stop shop for sports betting and sports news. BetOnline.net. It's not just basketball. It's not just football. It's not just baseball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So it is a Mailbag Wednesday, and I want to get to as many of your questions as I possibly can. First and foremost, we've got one question coming in from Scott on Twitter. And just a reminder, if you want to send in a question for Mailbag Wednesday, and it can be anything. It can be LSU related, SEC related, basketball, football, baseball, gymnastics, women's basketball. Feel free to send in any and all questions that you may have. You can tweet me at Caroline Fenton 1. You can tweet at LockedOnLSU. You can send either of those accounts DMs. You can comment on our YouTube streams. However you want to ask a question, I'll make sure to dig those up and find them for you so I can answer your question as best as I possibly can. But I do them every Wednesday, so just try and get them in before Wednesday, and I'll try my best to get to them. But our question from Scott says, what are you most excited for LSU baseball this season? Now, I'm glad that Scott brought this up because I'm going to get into plenty of baseball content coming up. LSU starting their season on February 18th, so I'll make sure to have plenty of pregame coverage, preseason coverage, and coverage of all of the games, kind of recapping what I saw there from G. Johnson in his first year. But I think that's exactly what I'm looking forward to the most is Jay Johnson and what he's able to do with not just this recruiting class, but number one recruiting class in the nation, which is a huge pat on his back, because I think you can kind of look at the dichotomy between LSU baseball and LSU football, and even just football in general. I mean, you see a coach that either got fired or is moving jobs or is on their way out from one job. You see a lot of players transfer, you see a lot of recruits flip, but I think that's a huge feather in Jay Johnson's cap and the LSU baseball program's cap in general, is that they were able to maintain recruits, 5-star recruits. Recruits were following Jay Johnson from Arizona, from the West Coast. They wanted to follow Jay Johnson. They wanted to be where he is. So I think that's a great sign. And I'm excited to see what he does with this existing class as well, this existing team, because we don't really necessarily know what to expect. I mean, for me, I'm just, shooting for the moon, hoping for the best. Hoping that this team is able to capitalize off of having the number one recruiting class in the nation. And I mean, it's not going to be an easy road. This is Jay Johnson's first season as a head coach in the SEC, coming from Arizona in the Pac-12. I mean, that's no easy competition either. But you look at the SEC, and the competition is so stout, and it only heats up year after year. I mean, of course, you have, the usual contenders in Arkansas and Mississippi State and Vanderbilt, but Tennessee's program ramping up very much so. Georgia's program ramping up very much so. So, I mean, Jay Johnson is going to have his work cut out for him very much so. But I think that's what I'm most excited for to see this season, is just it's all newness. With Paul Mainieri, for the most part, we kind of knew what to expect from the style. We knew what to expect just in general, just what to expect from Paul Mainieri's coaching style, from his coaching philosophy. But this is going to be completely new. I'm excited to see what Jay Johnson is able to do, what he's able to come into Baton Rouge, and the culture that he's able to establish, and the bar that he's going to set in his first year. So thank you, Scott. That is what I'm most excited for this LSU baseball season, is just all of the newness and to see what this talent can do in the SEC this year. We have Rachel, who sent in a question. Thank you very much, Rachel. She said, you talked about LSU getting another elite quarterback. I talked about that last week. I kind of compared Joe Burrow and Peyton Manning. Both of those players were able to completely turn around not just their college teams, but their NFL teams as well. I mean, you look at the Indianapolis Colts that were just dumpster fire before Peyton came in. He comes in, they're instant contenders. They go to a Super Bowl a few years later. Joe Burrow comes in. The Bengals were the worst team in the NFL. He comes in 2 years later, and they're in the Super Bowl. And I said, Peyton Manning was able to do that at Tennessee, Joe Burrow at LSU as well. But I said, don't be like Tennessee. Go find another Joe Burrow. Go continue to make splashes in the quarterback market. Rachel goes on to say, but how do you know that a quarterback is going to be the next Joe Burrow or Peyton Manning or an elite quarterback? That's a good question, because you don't. I mean, you don't know. It's with recruiting. It's with drafting in the NFL. You just don't know how a player is going to turn out in your offensive or defensive system, in the culture on your team. You don't know how the adjustment from high school to college level may work out. You don't know if and all of these new factors in college football as well, and NIL and transfer portal, it's so easy to just bop around to wherever the best opportunity is. You don't know if they're going to be elite. You don't know if they're going to be, quote unquote, the next Joe Burrow or the next Peyton Manning, which I don't think is necessarily a fair label to put on a 17 or 18-year-old kid. But I go back to what I heard Ida Orgeron say about Joe Burrow. He said, we were recruiting him. He was between Cincinnati and LSU, and Coach Joe said, it was me and Joe and a few other coaches on the staff, and they said all it took was like 10 minutes talking to Joe Burrow, talking football, talking about what this team can do, and they knew that he was something special. So I think it's one of those things that when you know, you know. When you see it, you understand it. It's almost like an uncoachable kind of thing. You can sense the leadership. You can sense the confidence. And you can talk with them about their football IQ, about their football knowledge. Strength and conditioning, that comes. Arm talent can be conditioned and tailored. But when it comes down to it, elite quarterbacks don't just have a strong arm. They're not just accurate. They don't have just a high football IQ. They're also good leaders. They also want to come in and make a difference and have that motivation and they have that hunger for success. That's the kind of thing that you can't coach, but that's the kind of thing that you can sense in a quarterback coming in. While that doesn't guarantee that they're going to be, a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, a quarterback that could lead your team to a championship, it does mean that it gives you a pretty gosh darn good shot. I apologize if I wasn't able to get to your question this week. I try to get to as many as I possibly can. And if we have any overflow for next week, I will make sure to get to your question next week for next Mailbag Wednesday. So make sure to tune in for next Wednesday. But that is going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Tomorrow, we will look into the LSU-Georgia game. We'll recap that game, how the Tigers fare hosting the Bulldogs on Wednesday night. Plus, we'll recap basketball around the SEC, big Tennessee-Kentucky game, what that kind of looks like for LSU going into the SEC tournament. So we'll get into all of that and more tomorrow. So thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I will see y'all tomorrow, Tiger fans.